I'm very happy to introduce the fireside chat. So first, let me introduce you to with no fire. Peter Merholz is going to be moderating or facilitating for us. He's been active in the design and product space for 25 years, most notably in building premier user experience consultancy, Adaptive Path, and now a design executive and product leader. He co-wrote Org Design for Design Orgs, the first book focused on the organizational, managerial, and operational challenges of building in-house design teams. And beside him, we have Anne Purves, the Director of Design Operations at Pinterest. She's not only shaped the role of ops within the organization, but has also championed design through the rapid growth of the company. Prior to Pinterest, Anne hailed from both agency at Method SF and Product World's Jawbone, where she had in-depth experience working with a variety of clients in complex design challenges. And Amy Thibodeau, Director of User Experience at Shopify, where she leads the UX operations team, as well as design, research, content strategy, and UX development for the platform team. In earlier iterations of her life, she was one of the first members of Facebook's now gigantic content strategy team, she just renovated an old house in the south of France, worked at art museums, and traveled around the world. Welcome. So we're going to be opening up for questions. Please put your hand up, or I'll just remind you about the app here, and this is the reference F138. Over to you.
All right. So yeah, a couple of things before we get going. Anne was the last speaker before lunch. There wasn't an opportunity for Q&A for her, so we're going to use this as that part of that opportunity because it's also relevant, right? Operationalizing design is about scaling design orgs. So if you have questions for Anne, kind of based on that talk, start putting those in. The app has a special Shopify thing. Start thinking of those. As you're doing that, so what we're going to be talking about is scaling design organizations. I want each of us to tell basically our current experience or a recent experience of scaling, just so folks have a sense of what we've been through. For example, when I led the design team at Groupon, there was about 25 people, and within a year and a half, we got to 60. I also helped Capital One as they were scaling from 40 designers, and then 4 years later, they had about 350. So I'm curious kind of what scale you've seen at Pinterest and then what scale you've seen at Shopify.
Sure. So I started at Pinterest about 3.5 years ago, and I would say the design team was about 50 people when I started, and we're just topping over 100 right now. So we've pretty much doubled in size in about 3 years. And we've seen some growth where we'd have rapid growth, and then we'd have a number of people leave, and then we'd have rapid growth again in hiring. On the design ops side, when I started, there were 3 of us, and now we're a team of 8. So we've also scaled there as well.
Cool.
And I've been at Shopify it'll be 3 years in January. And I think the biggest change that I've seen in terms of scale here was a few years ago, we basically reorganized our company around product areas or business areas. And so that's when I started focusing on platform. And at that point in time, the platform team was about 10 people for UX, and now it's probably close to 30. So that's a pretty big change. At Shopify, we've got just over 350 people across UX. So that's across design, research, content strategy, and UX development. So it's a pretty big team. And UX operations is new at Shopify as of January. So we started with no UX operations people, and now we're a team of about 6. So not a lot of people, but a lot of scale, because we went from 0 to 6 this year, and we'll be continuing to invest in UX operations next year as well.
Excellent. Let's get a sense of, I'm going to do that annoying thing where I'm going to ask you to raise your hands. Please do it. It's the only time we'll do it during this session. But just to get a sense of the scale of the design organizations, scale of the organizations that you all are part of. So who here is a UX team of 1? Okay, good. 2 to 7, kind of a decent team size. Oh, okay. So we got a bunch of those. 8 to 20. Okay, fewer. 21 to 50. 50 to 100? A few. Anyone over 100? the people at Shopify. Excellent. So what I'm going to assume then, we kind of had a hump early on there at that kind of 7 to 15, 8 to 15 range. I'm hoping you are all scaling your organizations, and that's why you're here, to learn how to keep growing. We have some questions here around operations that I think are relevant to both and your talk from earlier, but I'd also be curious to hear Amy's perspective on it. Actually, the first question that came in, and what's your perspective on having design split between long-term strategy and near-term delivery? And I'm curious, both of you, how you handle kind of protecting design to be able to think long-term. How do you use operations, let's say, as a mean to enable design to do the longer-term stuff? Design can get ground down by sprint-based, product development models. So how do you operationalize it so design has the freedom to do the long-term stuff while also doing near-term stuff? First Anne, and then Amy.
Sure, that's a really good question. I'm not going to pretend to have it completely solved, but I think one thing that's really helped, especially at Pinterest, is that we have this thing called the triad, and it's basically product management, eng management, and design leads. And each team has that triad, so everything is super cross-functional, and it kind of evens the scales, so it's not product-led, it's not eng-led, it's not design-led, it's a true collaboration between the three disciplines. And as part of that, to get to the kind of the long-term thinking, every half when we do our planning, that's a collaboration between those three partners. And the way that planning works at Pinterest is design executives and leaderships kind of set our overall company OKRs of what are the goals, what are we focusing on for the year. And then every team is empowered to go and plan individually for their specific project or team area. And they have to roll up into the company OKRs. And so as part of that planning process, product, eng, and design partner together to really figure out what projects in those areas make the most sense for the half. And there's usually a good balance between some long-term bets of what are we going to try, where are we going to push the boundaries, what are we going to try to really innovate on, and then there's the short-term, what's feasible right now, what do we need to address? Maybe that's just getting up to parity with something of where we need to be, but it's a little more short-term. So I think during each of those planning processes, there's a good mix of a couple big bets, and they're framed that way. Hey, these are the bets, these are the challenges that we're gonna go after. And then there's the short term, here's what we know we need to get done this quarter, this sprint, and here's how we're gonna execute on it.
So it's quite similar here, actually. We don't call ours triads; we call them trifectas. Big difference, but very similar. Where we have leadership in all of our different business areas, which is represented by somebody from UX, somebody from engineering, and somebody from product. And those people are really responsible for working together to make sure there's a good balance in terms of how they're thinking about the long-term vision. We also are in the middle of our roadmap planning for 2020 right now, and we go through this once a year in earnest, but I would say we do pretty meaty check-ins about 6 months in, where we're looking at what we said we would do, we're looking at the priorities, and we're looking at sort of where we line up against those priorities. I think the other thing that I'll mention is we have a fairly defined product process here called GSD, Get Shit Done, Get Shit Done at Scale. And within that process, we actually have built in phases for ideation and exploration. And it's not always a long exploration or ideation. It depends on the project, but it is really important to us that we invest some time up front with a cross-functional team in understanding the problem that we're trying to solve and making sure that we're moving towards solving that problem. I will say that UX operations is not super involved in this. We have really great leaders in UX across the company, and they are really responsible for making sure that their team understands the long-term vision and sort of where that green path is, but is also able to, execute on objectives that are going to deliver real value to people on an ongoing basis. So we really lean on them and their expertise with their team to make sure that that balance is in place.
Excellent, excellent. we have a couple of folks here asking kind of around the definition of and the structuring of design ops organizations. And so, again, love to hear from both of you. I got to see Amy talk about this a couple weeks ago at the Design Ops Summit. It's intriguing to me that Amy's team is smaller for a UX organization that's 3 times the size of Anne's team. And so I'd love to kind of reflect on some of these things and just hear kind of, and we'll start with Amy on this one. How is your team structured? What are the elements that fall within what you call UX ops? I know it's not called design ops here. We'll start there, hear from Anne, kind of see where this conversation goes.
Yeah. So we call it UX operations, and we call it that because we support the UX team, not just the designers on the team. So that's the reason for that nomenclature difference. And I will say that this year we're very much still figuring it out. So we're a small team. I mentioned we're 6 people. I spend part of my time on platform leadership and part of my time on UX operations leadership. So this year has been very much a process of us trying a bunch of things, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, but also I think investing enough time with the broader team to really understand what's working well without our involvement and where the gaps really are. So because we're organized according to different parts of the business, we really want to maintain a lot of autonomy for UX leaders in different areas to build their team, build their culture, and really work in the ways that really suits their product area and their team. And so as UX ops, what we're really working on defining is that foundational layer, the things that we really want to be true for everybody who's in UX at Shopify. So the things we've been focusing on are things like learning, onboarding. We want people who join Shopify and UX to have a consistent onboarding experience regardless of which team they join. Context and education. We've worked on developing a UX handbook. So there's a source of truth that people can go to. We work with them to keep it up to date. We also work on things like how we show up in the community. So sponsorships, we're a sponsor of this summit, and we look for opportunities to support the community and really look at ways of bringing up sort of the next level or the next group of design practitioners or UX practitioners. And we also do a bunch of sort of cultural building events across the company. So once a year, we do an event called UX Summit, where we bring people from UX together from wherever they're located in the world for a few days of spending time together, meeting one another, learning together, and those kinds of things. Now, I'm working on my plan for 2020. It's gonna look a little bit different, but it's really been very much an iterative process, just like we do with product. We try something, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, we learn from it. But we've built a team of people who are pretty flexible in terms of what they focus on and work on, with the exception of one person that we've recently hired specifically to focus on research operations. And that's our first sort of dedicated to one discipline role.
Before we get to Anne, I'm curious, what did you try that didn't work?
Well, so here's the truth of the matter. At the beginning of the year, it was me and one other person, and we had effectively planned to do everything. So we had created an investment plan that had us basically doing everything, tackling 10 million different opportunities across the company. And I think some of those opportunities, what we've learned, are actually, they need us to be involved, and others are actually doing just fine without us, and some of them are just lower priority. So Jen could speak to this probably better than I can, but when she started in July, it was kind of like, okay, Jen, here's 25,000 things that you should own and kind of run with. And very quickly, Jen, because she's wonderful, and some of the other people that I've hired have kind of looked at me and gone, you're crazy. Like this is not sustainable. And what's more important is the things that we've worked on, in some cases, haven't been the things the team most needs us to work on. So we've got Darren up here. He leads our retail team. He leads UX. He does a really good job of building culture on his team, of driving quality on his team. He does not need us to sort of be leaning in to tell him how to do that. So I think it's really about learning where people are actually doing just a great job without our involvement, because then it becomes really obvious to them and to us where where it's actually useful for us to lean in. Because it's 350 people across Shopify and UX. We can't support them all.
I'll say similarly at Pinterest, Design Ops has gone through an evolution. So when I started, we're a team of producers, and producers are embedded into each pillar. And so a pillar is like a business area. So growth is a pillar, core is a pillar, partnerships are a pillar. And there'd be one producer responsible for each pillar, and that means that they were tracking every project that was happening within that pillar. And really the core function of Design Ops at that time was really to protect our designers' time so that they could actually focus on what they do best, which is design. And so I know I get questions sometimes about how do you make the case for Design Ops. And one of the things is that if you look at your designers, look at where they're spending their time. And it might be time for Design Ops if they're spending the majority of their time in meetings, trying to work out cross-functional misalignments, trying to get clarity on what they're supposed to be working on, what the priorities are. Those are all good signals that maybe my designer that I'm paying a lot of money to design, and that's what they've gone to school for and are best at, should be focused more on design, and we need someone to come in and help take over the operational aspect of it. So when I started at Pinterest, that was very much the charter of the Design Ops team. And I'll say recently, as we've grown, as we've scaled, as we've matured as a company, it's made more sense for us to transition our design operations folks, our design program managers, to focus on the highest impact, most ambiguous problems that we're facing as a company. I have a pretty senior bench on my team, and so this was kind of a win-win for us because when they were so deeply embedded in every team, they weren't growing professionally. They could project manage with their eyes closed. So this provided opportunity, one, for them to flex their strategic muscles and have more impact. We were taking better advantage of their skill set. We're also making more impact for the company by focusing on these areas that really needed to be sorted out, that were super messy, that we've been struggling with for a couple of years. And so that they could bring some operational excellence to that, provide some organization, provide some team structure around that. So that's been the evolution of Design Ops since I've started at Pinterest.
Excellent. I'm going to add a little content. I'm not only going to moderate. Well, just as a framework that, as was mentioned, I co-wrote a book called Org Design for Design Orgs, and my co-author, Kristen, is a Design Ops. She helped coordinate the summit, Design Ops a thought leader. I don't think she would call herself a thought leader, but I can call her a thought leader. And she and I come up with a model that's got 3 Ps as a way of thinking about Design Ops. People, practice, and program. Sometimes she says platform. People is everything to do with anything from recruiting and hiring, professional development, that kind of stuff. Practice is kind of learning and development, which I don't think either of you like the training and like you have an L&D person. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so actually that's part of this evolution into program management is we've also, we have 2 folks focused right now. They're called our designer experience team, and they live with under Design Ops, and they tackle all of the things that have to do with our design team culture. So things like onboarding, L&D, what skills are we missing on our team, how can we better educate them, and they're responsible for forming that programming and executing on it.
Great. So yeah.
Similarly, we also have somebody dedicated to it, and it's onboarding, but we also have a cultural value at Shopify, which is be a constant learner.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are always looking for ways to kind of enable that and give people opportunities for that. So actually this afternoon in Ottawa, we've got Eva Ladalam, who's a sketch artist, teaching a sketching workshop to the team. So we're always looking at sort of doing those things as well.
Excellent. So supporting people, supporting practice, which we were talking about, and then programs, which is kind of the doing of the work, which is where a lot of ops starts, is in that kind of program management, producer, and practice role. So if you need a nice little mnemonic or rubric there, those 3 Ps, I found to be helpful. I don't want to turn this only into a Design Ops discussion. We will get back to Design Ops. But we are talking about scaling organizations, and there are other aspects that we have to think about when we're scaling a design organization, particularly, and a question that came up that got a few thumbs ups was around leadership. And when do you know how to develop, or when to kind of bring on certain new leadership roles. Basically, as you're scaling, you need people now to lead the folks that you're bringing in. When do you do that? At what levels? The question here, what is the best time or indicators for a company considering creating higher leadership roles for design? What's at stake if they do or don't? So I'm curious, I might start with Amy. Because you're both a design leader and a design ops leader, but you've probably been and you've been here for a while and seen probably quite an evolution of leadership. How do you know when to bring on leaders? What do you risk if you haven't brought on a leader? What ends up happening? Just talk a little bit about the role that leadership plays in helping scale an organization.
Yeah, so I alluded earlier to the way that our team is sort of spread across different parts of the business, and I think it's really important that we have really strong leadership in each of those areas that can sit alongside a director plus level person in engineering and product to really provide that counterbalance and make sure that the user experience is being considered from the beginning of the idea through. So we have hired quite a few leaders in Shopify since I've been here, specifically to occupy that seat that can sort of lean into those types of conversations at, like I said, a director plus level. But then within my own team, I think it's a mix of bringing in leadership where we need skills that we're missing. And we've used on my team, Mia Bloom, I'm not sure if she's the one who made this up, but she has this sort of wheel of attributes. It's called, I think, the shape of a designer, where we've gone through that to kind of look not just at hard skills, but also what types of people have we added to the team, what are they bringing to the team, to kind of identify where we have gaps. So we want to ideally have a UX team that is balanced across those shapes. So we've brought in people to fill those gaps, but I think it's also really important to not just do performance management on your team, but also to work with your team to be thinking about the opportunity for the next layer of leaders on your team. So it's really easy to think when you've got a gap in leadership that you should hire someone into it. But I think it's really, really important to look across your team and identify which people are really excelling and that are going to be looking for this next step, and that they really understand what the next step is for them and what they kind of need to do to get there. So it's not always about hiring somebody from the outside in, but looking to elevate the people that you have, and in some cases fill skills gaps that they might have that is preventing them from, say, sitting on one of those trifectas and being a really strong advocate with counterparts in design and product.
Yeah, I would echo that you really have to assess the needs of your team. And by assess, I think that's digging into, okay, is this a skill that I'm missing on my team that maybe I can help cultivate through learning and development? Or am I truly missing a leadership position, someone to balance the scales to make sure that we're pushing our product forward? I think the danger is, and I think we did this a little bit at Pinterest, was we became pretty top-heavy pretty quickly, because it's easy when you feel like you have something missing that you need to bring in someone who's really senior to fill that gap. And then what happens is we became top heavy, and then we became pretty hierarchical. For a team of 100, it doesn't really make sense. So we had to just recently kind of reassess and level set, essentially, who are our true leaders, who are we investing in as managers, and maybe who are our creative directors. Are we creating an IC path for people who don't want to go into management, or are we kind of pushing everyone into management, and that's not something everybody wants to do or is necessarily good at. So I think that's the danger of design leadership. I think it's really easy to kind of overcorrect and be like, oh, we need a leader, we need a senior person, they're going to come in and fix all of our problems. So I would just be really careful in assessing exactly what you need and trying to figure out if there's someone you can grow internally, or if there's some other way that you can fill the gap.
I'm curious, Anne, do you have, so we have two tracks here. One is a manager track, and one, we call it a technical track, but that sounds like it's an engineering role. It's not. It's for those people that you mentioned who really want to lean into impact through their craft rather than through leading people. And I'm curious how you do that at Pinterest.
Yeah, so we recently just created, after we kind of did this assessment and said, oh my gosh, we have so many design managers and so many design leaders, and not all of them are great or necessarily passionate about people managing. And so we realized that we weren't creating an opportunity for all this extremely talented people who want to just continue to drive into their craft or just focus on the product, and they don't want to deal with all of the administration and stuff of people managing and performance reviews and comp conversations and resourcing and hiring. I mean, management is not very sexy for a lot of people who manage. You probably know that. And so we did build out our creative director path. So now we have skills and definitions for people who just want to dig deeper into that craft and lead through teaching and mentoring, but not necessarily having to people manage.
Yeah, we just rolled out something very similar maybe a year ago for the same reasons. Yeah.
Anybody with questions that they would like to ask not through the app? We do have a mic. I see a hand raised here. So, yeah. And if others have questions, feel free to raise your hands as we're winding down from this one.
Hi.
And please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Alexander Sidbon. I'm the head of design at Medidata. So I've been taking over for the last 3 weeks a team of 20, which haven't had product design operations for the last 2 years or probably ever. But we have a product operations team as part of the greater product team, and so I'm wondering if I should kind of fight the good fight to have our own design ops team or work with the product management operations team, which is, from my opinion, looking at it, already pretty overwhelmed, to try to make this happen. Thank you.
So I guess I would put that question back at you, and I would ask you, what gaps do you see that you would have a UX or design operations team fill? You know, I think you have to start from the place of being able to identify the need for it, because an operations team doesn't solve all the problems. And it took us, and I'm not saying this is ideal, but it took us to be in a pretty big UX team before we built out a UX operations team. So I think like you have to assess really the need and think about what you would have that person or people do and what the impact of that work would be. Probably not just on design, but also on how you're approaching building products together with your engineering and product counterparts.
Do you have anything to?
I don't. I think, I think assessing the needs, looking at the gaps. I think there is a difference between product ops and design ops. Product tends to be a little bit more focused on market and product, whereas design ops is a little bit more specialized in understanding design thinking and how product is built and the product development process as a whole. So I think it really depends on where the gaps are in your team, what your team currently can't execute on or get done because they don't have this ops person is kind of a good lens to think about it through.
His question connected with one of the questions Ryan Neufeld asked through the app, which connects to, you mentioned Mia Bloom, a tweet that she had, I don't know how long ago, where she was talking with someone, a design leader, I forget exactly the context, but it was a relatively small design team, 10, 11 folks, and someone was saying, we need design ops, et cetera, and basically her response is, no, that's your design manager's job. And the question that Ryan asked is, design ops seems to overlap with design management. And I think that's true. Before you have design ops, the design leaders, the design managers are having to do the people practice program stuff. So how do you see that relationship between ops and management / leadership? Like, how do you start decoupling or disambiguating these things so that people aren't duplicating effort or falling over one another, and you have clear lines of responsibility?
Yeah, so I think design managers focus on the people as well, but in a slightly different way. They focus on their individual ICs that are reporting into them and how they can grow those individual people, help them set goals. Where do they want to go in their career? What skills do they want to learn and build? And they're really responsible for that growth. They're also responsible for making sure that they're meeting our design quality bar, giving feedback on designs, being able to speak to the craft as well. So those are all things that a design manager does that design operations people don't do on my end. Where design operations people focus on the people aspect of the design team is more holistically. So when I was talking about that designer experience team, they're thinking about our design team as a whole and how do we create that culture, how do we build it, how do we want them to be onboarded, what do we want to teach them, what do they need from us. So it's thinking about it more at a team level instead of an individual level. And so I'd say that's the key difference between design management and design operations.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think one of the things that pushed us to have a UX operations team really is when we reorganized from being discipline-centric, so being a UX team, to being a company of teams organized around business areas. So we had multiple UX teams in a way. And so when I was around this time last year talking to a lot of design leaders in the company, they often were saying that they were recreating the same resources or they were investing in the same things over and over and over again. So we were duplicating work. In some cases, we were creating silos where there could be the perception that one team was a better place to work than another team. And so that's sort of what drove us to notice a need, is really to connect the dots for all of those different pieces that were being created by different people without talking to each other at the same time, so that we could have a cohesive understanding about certain elements of people and process that we wanted to be true across the board for everyone.
Just to build on that too, that's not to say that design operations and design managers don't work closely together. I think we work very, very closely together because they are understanding the skill gaps and what the people need, and we are focusing on building out those programs and those processes that are going to work best for our team. So it is a really tight partnership.
It's also, I think, a good partnership with people who are focused on the technical side of their craft. So we have some, really great staff, we call them staff designers or staff content strategists, who are not focused on leading people, but who are focused on really excelling through their craft. And often they want to offer mentorship opportunities, or they want to offer office hours, or they want to find scalable ways of helping other people learn what they know. And there's a lot of overhead to figuring out how to do that. And that's one of the things that UX operations can help with here as well. So that instead of spending their time figuring out how to offer a workshop to 350 people, they just have to have the content.
We have hey, Davis.
Hi. Oh, don't have to introduce myself. Thank you. Amy, you mentioned before that flexibility is a key skill that you look for when hiring for the design or the UX ops teams. So two-part question is, what other skills do you look for in building out that team? And have you found related fields or great mining places to find these gems? Thanks.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Yeah, I mean, so we are at the moment focusing on building a team of, people who are generalists to some extent, because the reality is we need them to be able to pivot and kind of go where the opportunity is and where the need is. In terms of other skills I've looked for, so it's really I think the ability to take something complicated and break it down into simple pieces. Clear communication, the ability to say no in a way that doesn't make people feel terrible, but sets some boundaries. And I think also the ability to project manage, honestly, to a certain extent, because often somebody will come to us with a problem, and it's a really big problem, and it's hard to understand the root of the problem. And if you just focused on the problem, I'll give you an example. So we have about 60 researchers across the company. They're all doing great research, but they all store their research in different places. In Google Documents, it's hard to connect the dots, it's hard to find it. So that's a really big problem. And it would be really easy for that problem to just remain a big, ambiguous, hard problem. So the people that I'm looking for right now for the team are people who can take something like that and break it down into smaller pieces that we can make progress on without feeling they have to solve the biggest problem. In terms of people that I've hired, one of the people on my team helped scale support at a big organization. And so really understood, I think, the messy human problems of scaling a big team, and of the importance of leaning into what humans need to feel valued, even in the midst of all the scale and the busyness. So, but the team's only 6 people. So I'm kind of pulling from everywhere. Jen did global resource allocation at a big company. So it's not people who directly come from UX disciplines on the whole, actually.
Just to add on to that of where to find design ops people, of where I've had success, I think design agencies or agencies in general, for anybody who's worked at one before, they're super tough. And you just kind of by nature, you're working with multiple clients, different personalities. And so I've had a lot of success hiring from agency life because there's a certain scrappiness, there's a certain hunger and flexibility and just understanding of working with a variety of different people, which is super valuable when you're asking someone to step into a design ops role, especially if you have a smaller team. You don't want someone who's going to be timid about asking questions or meeting new people or setting those boundaries. And so I found that people from agencies tend to kind of have that ingrained inside of them.
Is it true that you have people from the Army
Yes.
in Pinterest Top? Okay.
Yes, actually the military has been really, we have 2 people from the Army and the Navy who are actually phenomenal at design ops as well.
Yeah, at the Design Up Summit a couple weeks ago, there was some survey that had gone out and basically saw that about, for design ops teams are roughly half former designers and half non-designers, people more from a more other type of operational background, which can include the military. So you end up getting a mix like that. There's a constellation of questions and something that has been kind of rattling around my head that I want to pose to you, which I think you can, in some ways, we can start with thinking about scaling design. We can start with a fairly simple concept that's probably difficult to address, which is how do you maintain quality as you scale, right? When you're small, quality is maintained through design leadership and crits and reviews, and you're all right there. Then as you grow and you get different silos and you get different business units and you've got 45 people in one team and 40 people in another team, and what are the mechanisms by which you maintain quality as you scale? Because you can't have one person creative direct everything to ensure that anymore.
Yeah, it's tough. We're working through that now. I mean, as you scale, I think quality is always top of mind and an issue for design orgs. Some things that have worked for us in addition to critiques and in addition to creating this alternative path for creative directors where they can be more hands-on in mentoring our more junior or newer folks, is establishing design principles as a design org. What are our principles fundamentally that we believe in for our organization? So like one of our principles at Pinterest is to clear the noise. So what does that mean? And then we go into, there's a lot of documentation about what clear the noise means, but it's like, hey, we only have at most 2 call to actions on a screen. Or you're starting to set up some design boundaries so that people have this framework or rules to work within. And that's really helpful for our junior folks, but also it's helpful cross-functionally as well for people to understand, or engineers who are also encouraged to come forward with their ideas aren't going completely rogue. We have some boundaries that we've agreed upon as an organization that we follow. And so design principles has helped take a step forward in making sure that we're holding the bar of design quality.
And I would say, similar, we've got experience values, and we rolled out some new experience values earlier this year, and I think one of the big pieces of work around that is making them real, like finding ways of integrating them into people's lives, because it's really easy to roll out principles or experience values and then nobody ever looks at them again, So we will do things like we have a channel that pretty much everybody in UX is in called UX Talk, where somebody will go in and they will take an experience principle and they will sort of give an example of how they interpret it. And then a conversation will sort of ensue around that. We've also built them into critiques as a way of asking similar questions and making similar trade-offs. I would say the other thing that we have is Polaris, which is our design system. So that is something that helps us establish a baseline set of standards, at least the floor, if not the ceiling, of how we want people to build and think about building and designing experiences here. And then the third thing I'll mention is we do have a UX leadership team, which is a subset of our directors group, and we work together with the other directors to determine some big rocks for the year. So in 2020, we have a set of big rocks for UX that the entire team shares and works together on, and we do things like twice a year we do check-ins with literally every business area's UX team to talk about how they're thinking about those big rocks, how they're applying those big rocks, just as a way of not making sure that everybody is perfect, but making sure that everybody is at least thinking about the same things, having similar conversations, and thinking about the trade-offs that they're making, because there are always trade-offs when we talk about quality, I think.
Right, right. Well, it connects with, I think, something Jared talked about this morning around the UX-infused organization, and I'm wondering how your organizations handle that trade-off or striking the right balance, making a judgment call of when something is good enough from a design standpoint to release it, right? Like his story about Disney holding out and holding out and holding out until it was ready, even though it was 2 years later and however many hundreds of millions of dollars more, they had recognized the value of good design and were willing to wait on that. And like, how do you make those judgment calls to make sure that quality is being upheld, but you're not essentially slowing down? How do you? So that's kind of the second part of the quality question is the speed question. How do you maintain quality and speed? Because speed's something else that tends to get lost when you scale. You have a lot more meetings, a lot more coordination. You have to get a lot of people agreeing and aligning to something. Alignment, I think, was one of your areas from this morning. So how do you maintain speed and quality and autonomy? Like, how do you rectify these what can feel like opposing forces?
Yeah, I think it comes down, it really helps to have strong design leadership, but also strong collaboration. So this comes back to the triad, which comes back to ultimately planning, which is empowers teams to come up with the ideas so that you still feel autonomous. And that everybody is aligned and has a clear plan on, hey, this is what we're going to execute on. This is our focus for the quarter, the half, the year, whatever it might be. And so I think the key to quality and also moving quickly and getting product out into the world is really having that foundation collaboration between the three areas that really take a product to market, which is, in our case, eng, product, and design. They're the ones building it, crafting the experience, and ultimately responsible for getting it out into the world. So if you don't have that foundation or that relationship, that empathy between those teams, that slows everything down, and that makes decisions a lot harder. It also, if you don't have that clear plan of what are we going after, what's the brief, those types of questions answered, that slows everything down as well. So I think once you can get a good, strong relationship, collaboration, foundation, and a clear plan in place, things will naturally go quickly and also at quality.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think we have an explore phase in our sort of project cycle, in part because I think where things get really tripped up is when people move towards a solution without necessarily understanding the problem that they're solving, or who they're solving it for. So we also have briefs that try to nail down that question. And I think for every project, it's important to also understand what the MVP is and what we hope to learn from shipping something. So Shopify, we're building software for people to basically build their businesses on top of. So while I love Walt Disney, I mean, he was making beautiful movies for people. I feel a real sense of urgency when there is a gap in our experience that is going to help somebody build their business, that we do not have the luxury of making it perfect. We have to get it to them because their very business might depend on it. And so making sure that the people who are working on these problems are really connected to that, And also that they understand that there is an opportunity to iterate and learn when something has launched. So we can't approach our work as though we've got one shot. We're not printing dictionaries. We are building interfaces in a way that can allow them to evolve and change as we learn things. And so I think really reinforcing that with our teams so that they understand that the work they're doing has to be iterative goes a long way to, I think, not making them okay with crap going out the door, because that's not good either, but letting them kind of let go of perfection and instead focus on, what is the smallest unit of value that they can provide where we can learn something and hopefully help our customers along the way.
Excellent. Were there any questions in the room? I kind of got away from that. There were earlier. Maybe we've answered them all. There's a up here at the front. We're getting the microphone, like literally at the front. Right here. No. Well, and please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Farwa. I'm the Director of Product Design at Kira Systems, which is a machine learning legal tech company. And my question is around growth and performance evaluation matrix. So is that something that the design leader owns? Is that a collaboration between HR and design on how people can progress in their career paths, whether that's on the IC track or manager track? And as a follow-up to that, how do your organizations support moving into a cross-functional discipline? Let's say somebody on your team is in UX and wants to become a product manager, et cetera.
Yeah, so to the first part of your question about how do these levels and how do these levels and skills matrices kind of come to be? At Pinterest, it was a collaboration between our design leadership, so the director level design leadership, and our HR business partner to make sure that they're completely in the loop of how we're going to be evaluating our people. And while I think that was important to be design leadership led for the type of skills mapping and levels that we create, is so that everybody in leadership was really aligned on what our expectations are, what the bar is for each level and each discipline within the design team. And then the HR partner would come in with their expertise as well on like how we word something and push back on, okay, well, how would you evaluate somebody against XYZ skill? So it was a collaboration in creating that, those skills levels. In terms of supporting our people moving into different disciplines, I think my experience has been we're really supportive of it, and that goes down to strong design management as well. We really care about our people, and we care about their happiness and want to retain them as best we can, but if they have a passion that fits somewhere else or something that they want to explore, we as managers will do everything that we can to make that move happen to them, preferably within the company, but sometimes it is external as well.
Yeah, I mean, again, very similar. Our levels and our expectations are set by a combination of our HR group with the UX leaders across the company, because we think it's really important that there be consistency with that. You shouldn't have a different set of expectations if you're a crafter, designer in one part of our business than in another part of our business. And so we work together on that. When we do performance reviews, we do cross business area calibrations, just as a way of checking in to see if we've got these tools, but are we actually applying them? Are we thinking about them the same way? And so we do those types of check-ins. And but generally speaking, those are sort of a centralized resource that we all use. But then in terms of day-to-day performance management, it's really down to the leaders of each group. We have a newish leadership training program at Shopify that all of the leaders across the company are taking right now. And I think it's just an opportunity to kind of invest in leadership skills, because leadership is a craft, but we often don't treat it as one, I think just generally in the world. And then to your second question, the thing that I love the most about Shopify, but it's also creates some ambiguity, is we don't have really defined swim lanes. So one thing that I've particularly enjoyed in UX here is being able to kind of do what is needed to be done to make an impact. And often those things don't fit neatly within a definition of what someone with my job title does. So when I started here 3 years ago, I was initially hired to lead the content strategy team. And I went from that to leading the launch of Polaris, our design system, and now I'm creating this new UX operations team. And that's really been enabled by the fact that when there's an opportunity and I see it, I can put my hand up for it, I can lean in. Other people can do that as well. And nobody tells me to get back in my corner. And I really value that about this place. I don't think I would have had these same opportunities in other companies.
We'll just pass the mic over.
Thanks. Pass the mic, I like that.
Please introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Ted. I'm the Senior Design Manager for Intuit. And my question is, as you scale design teams, how do you start thinking about preventing silos from forming, and both from like an org perspective, like creation or restructuring, and also from creating operations that create more seamless end-to-end experiences?
Cold. My voice does not usually, it's usually a little higher than this. So I think there are a few touch points that we have where we bring together everybody across the user experience team, regardless of which business area or team they're focused on. So some of those are places like Slack channels where we're all together. I mentioned the regular debates we have about our experience values. We also do quarterly all hands where we bring everybody together to talk about some of the themes that are important to us, to give people an opportunity to get up and speak about their work. We do, although a lot of our critiques are based within our product areas, we do some critiques that are cross business area and are kind of inclusive to different disciplines. So we make sure there are some good collaboration moments there where we can share the way that we're approaching our work. And I think we really value spending time to create alignment at a leadership level. So I think if the people who are in leadership roles across your team are generally aligned, that creates a lot of alignment across their teams. And so that is something that we definitely invest time in, from having regular opportunities to talk to each other, to sometimes doing retreats twice a year with our most senior UX people.
I would just add into that, something that we're experimenting with right now is a little bit more fluidity in how we resource our designers. So historically it's been, okay, cool, you're on the growth team, you're on this team within the growth team. And we haven't been super flexible in letting our designers move around. And that's caused people to get bored, it's caused people to leave. And so we've kind of reevaluated how we resource or staff our teams, and are looking at holistically how we track that overall across all of our designers, all of our pillars, so that we can identify opportunities of where, because business ebbs and flows, so maybe sometimes partners are just completely underwater, but our core team is a little bit overstaffed, so then we can move people around. And what we found is that designers love that because they get more exposure, they get to chew on different problems. And so it causes them to be a lot happier. It also grows their skill set in a different business area. The tricky part with that is cross-functionally. Partners are really attached to their designers. They like to know exactly who to go to. So that is something that we're working through, of how do you create clarity while still creating the ability for people to move around within an organization where cross-functional partners are very much siloed.
I want to actually answer, or provide an answer, which is, you can't prevent silos from happening when you're scaling. So we should all recognize this. They are a function of scale. You are going to group, those groups are going to form other groups, and you're going to have silos. So what you need to do is develop, as they've been talking about, kind of strategies for acknowledging that reality. Because what you don't want is some 300-person collection of folks kind of battering around. That also doesn't work. I think something that I've done, had some success with, is for my silos to operate differently from other silos. So I don't embed my designers into product teams. I have my designers in design teams that cross products. I've been lucky to work in marketplaces, so I could kind of model my design teams on customers and their journeys that usually cross multiple product areas. So I'm creating a different kind of silo, but it's orthogonal to the existing silos, and so that gives you some of that matrix-ishness, right? But silos will exist. So making sure you're saving time to allow your teams to engage in an unsiloed way, I think is essentially a key strategy. Now, what you just reflected on about wanting to allow some fluidity, at least for some designers on your team so they can try new stuff, and now you have your cross-functional peers are like, step off, that's my design person, why are they not my design person anymore? And that touches on one of the questions, which is, how do you so we're trying to optimize what works best for our design or UX teams, which might not be seen as what works best cross-functionally. How do you have those conversations? Like, how do you strike that balance, have those conversations? What is it like engaging with your cross-functional peers who might not agree with the decisions you're making about the people within your purview?
My ideal dynamic with my leadership team is healthy tension. There should be some push and pull. There should be some good debates. And we certainly have those. And I think it's actually a signal of a healthy leadership team when you are having those debates. But I think, at the end of the day, you kind of have to look back to the plan that you set out at the beginning of the year and checking in on that. And if the decision helps to move the plan forward, then I think it's often a good decision. And if it doesn't help move the plan forward, but it's still a good decision, then is the plan right? So I think taking time to align at a strategic level so that when you're having those debates, it's not just about this designer or that designer or this engineer, but actually about like, what are we trying to do together? What are the goals? Because otherwise it can be hard to make a decision, because it's not even a decision, it's trade-offs, right? What are the right trade-offs to make at any given time? There's no like hard right or hard wrong decision often.
Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity to revisit your priorities, not only as a team, but as a company. I have yet to see or work at a company that has more designers than it has engineers or product managers. So we're always in a situation where design resources are something that are highly valued and needed. And the reality is we can't always cover every single team's priority. So really aligning and having that conversation with what is the priority as a business? What are we trying to get after? What's going to impact our users the most? What metric is this going to move the most? And that's the opportunity to have those discussions. And sometimes that means we're going to have to put something on the back burner or we're not going to be able to support something right now.
And it's also an interesting, in some ways, good problem to have. Like, I can remember when I started my career, having to sort of fight for my value and advocate for my value. That's what I was spending most of my time doing. And I find now it's more like everybody wants to work with UX here. And so it's not about pushing our way in, but rather about going, okay, like there are 3 designers and almost limitless opportunities. How are we going to prioritize those? And that feels like actually a really good problem to have compared to where I felt like I was, 10 years ago, which was like, please let me come in. Please let me be involved strategically in this project. Like, design is valuable. I feel like we're not having those types of debates anymore. And I will take this debate over that debate any old day of the week.
Something I want to make sure we get to, there were a couple of questions about it, and I'm surprised it hasn't come up as directly yet, because when you're talking about scaling design, there's one thing harder than anything else when you're trying to scale design, and that is hiring designers. Who here is struggling recruiting and hiring designers? Raise your hand. I'm asking you to raise your hands. Okay. Sorry, I said I wouldn't do it again. I did it again. So I'd love to hear, you've got 350 designers throughout Shopify. How large is your team?
So the UX team for a platform is around 30, but it's not all designers.
Not all designers. We're going to have a separate conversation about it's okay to call content people and researchers as part of the design team, but
I disagree.
And you've got 100 folks, you doubled in size. So like, what have you seen, what are strategies you've employed in order to help do the chopping wood and carrying water of growing these teams. What were some things that you didn't realize that you maybe changed in order to be able to start recruiting and hiring at scale? Like, what have you learned going through this process that might be pearls of wisdom for our folks here, and as they're looking, because they're probably earlier in their stages of growth, looking forward, what have you learned on being on the other side that they should maybe adopt?
Yeah, so I live and work in the Bay Area, which is extremely competitive. I mean, all of the major tech companies are there. It's Facebook, Instagram, Airbnb, Dropbox, all the big companies. So it's super competitive, and there's a relatively small pool of designers. And there's always going to be another company who can offer more money, more equity. And so for us, we really have to compete. And there's a few things that have worked really well, and it's the truth, is one, the culture and our belief in our mission at Pinterest, it being the world's inspiration, being that safe place on the internet that's about you and not projecting a different type of social persona. So that's one thing, is just selling our mission, and do people believe in that? And some people wholeheartedly believe in it, and that's why they come to Pinterest. But also, I think autonomy. There's a lot of impact that can be made at the size company that we are now that you can't get at other companies. And so that's really attractive for people, because designers like to work on these big, meaty, juicy problems that haven't been completely fleshed out yet, and where they can move around and work on different varieties of projects. So that's been super attractive and helpful in us recruiting talent and building out our team.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that one of the lessons that I have learned is that more people doesn't always equal more capacity, at least for a while. So sometimes you'll have a gap on a team and you'll think, oh, we're gonna hire somebody, we're gonna fill this gap. But in the last year, my team has grown so quickly that you can often forget the amount of time and investment that is required to getting someone up to speed, getting them on their feet, helping them navigate the company, helping them learn the business. And I think often when you're hiring, you don't plan for that. You just think, oh, well, we need a person here, so we'll hire someone. And you don't think about the fact that for a period of time, the team's capacity may actually be less when a new person joins, sometimes for months. And that's often a really good investment, but I feel like we often don't build that into our project plans or our projections because we just assume adding people will equal more capacity. And it does, hopefully, eventually, but sometimes it can take a while. I think for hiring, we've benefited actually from being not in Silicon Valley and from being here in Canada. Toronto is an incredibly multicultural city. The Canadian government is a government that is quite friendly to bringing skilled workers into the country and giving them a path to staying here. So I think we've really benefited from that, and we've got a really, I think, diverse workforce as a result.
My one piece of advice around recruiting and hiring is you're probably not spending enough time doing it. When I've consulted with companies in this regard, design leaders, if you've got open recs, you probably should be spending at least half of your time recruiting and hiring. When I say that, their eyes are like, but my job? And it's like, no, recruiting and hiring is your job. And you're gonna have to delegate the other parts of your job to other people on the team, because there's nothing more important than recruiting and hiring when you're in that mode, when you're in that scaling mode. And design leaders tend not to spend nearly enough time doing it. They hope that like the recruiter in HR can just somehow make it happen for them. That doesn't work. Like, just expect to spend more of your time recruiting and hiring, and then following on what Amy said, it's going to take longer than you thought getting those folks onboarded and kind of in the flow. So I think we have time for one more question. We have someone identified. Make it good.
This
Please
is a
introduce
clarity
yourself.
question. Yes, my name is Tino. I'm from Olo. I'm from New York. I'm a New Yorker. This is a question for Anne. You brought up autonomy for design problems, and so how do you surface that? You could do it in a resume. You could do it in a job post. You can bring it up, but how do you make that clear for them without exposing exactly what you're working on? Because sometimes it's secretive.
Just to make sure I'm understanding your question, you're saying like when we're interviewing, how do we make clear that you have impact and autonomy for the position that we're interviewing for? Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. I think that comes down to when they're in-person interviews, having conversations about what motivates them, and really pulling apart what's interesting to them to work on, and then making sure that that aligns with actually what you're looking for. And so I found that the most success actually comes in just talking honestly about my experience at Pinterest and how I've been able to move around, how I started off working on our business team, moved to core team, moved back to business, now focused purely on design. Sharing those types of stories and journeys just really illustrate to our candidates kind of the flexibility that there is within Pinterest. And then also sharing experiences of different processes or teams that I've built or where I've had impact. That just really illustrates for people the type of impact and culture that we have.
Well, it is exactly 5 o'clock, and I like to keep things timely. So thank you to Amy and Anne for their contributions, and thank you for your attention.